It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me in the studio, Conservative MP Jonathan Gullis, Labour's Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Baroness Chapman, Polly Mackenzie, who was Nick Clegg's senior advisor when he was Deputy Prime Minister, and the Conservative commentator Albi Amankona. Today, how can the biggest rail strikes for 30 years be stopped?
We need the union barons to sit down with Network Rail and the train companies and get on with it.
The entire country needs a resolution, and they will not forgive this government if they do not step in and resolve it.
More strikes are planned later this week, but the boss of Network Rail says there's a deal to be done.
We can offer a good pay rise to our colleagues and a good value to the taxpayer if only we can get sensible reforms in.
We'll ask the General Secretary of the RMT Union if he'll accept that.
We will prosper and flourish and thrive as never before if we leave the European Union on June the 23rd.
That was 6 years ago, but a new report says Brexit is being thwarted by woke dogma. We'll ask what that means. And remember the 1970s? Are we heading for a summer of discontent? Let's stick with that thought of the 1970s. It's something that's been mentioned by, amongst others, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. He's accused union leaders of, in his words, dragging the country back to the 70s, a time of widespread strikes across the public and private sectors. My opening question is to you all, but starting with Jonathan, are we going back to the 1970s, Jonathan?
Well, I certainly hope not, Jo, because I wouldn't look good in flared jeans, to be quite frank with you.
Is that it?
That's it.
Jenny?
No, obviously we're not going back to the 1970s. This country's got a lot to look forward to. I do note Kate Bush is at number one, which is probably more 80s than 70s. But I think we've come through a very, very difficult time with the pandemic. Of course we have. We've got a new future outside of the EU, but we have to be optimistic and we have to be positive, and we've got to look to the future and not look back to 40 years ago. You know, we've got great industries that we should be supporting. It's a shame we don't have a government that's actively alongside trying to make things work and is actually sowing division and making things worse. But I don't think we're going back to the 1970s. I think we've got a real prosperous future ahead of us.
Jonathan, what do you say to what Jenny has said about the government?
Well, I'm pleased to hear that Jenny's now suddenly a Brexiteer after having asked for a people's vote when she was the Member of Parliament for Darlington. And we'll explain why, which is why obviously we saw a resounding victory in 2019. In terms of going forward, this country's done fantastic things. Over 70 trade deals signed. We've seen that state-level deal in America, in Indiana.
But on this particular issue of the strikes and what Jenny has said about the government washing their hands of actually trying to find a resolution.
No one's washing their hands of anything. What it is network operators needing to negotiate with the trade unions. I used to be a trade union representative in schools for 3 years for the NASUWT. It's a negotiation that takes place between those on the shop floor and the management.
All right, well, let's go round the rest of the panel. For you, Polly, are we going back to, as Grant Shapps says, the bad old days of the 1970s?
I think there's the possibility. And what's remarkable about the government's approach, which seems to be sort of excited, actually, about strikes, because then they can blame them on the Labour Party, which, of course, isn't in government, at least last time I checked. It's usually Corbynistas who think that the Labour Party won the last two elections. But as far as I've worked out, it didn't. So why is everyone so excited about this idea of strikes and hostility and culture war and let's all have a big fight? It's actually what happened at the end of the 1970s is the people elected an extraordinarily different government to sort it all out. If you're the government, you don't want the country to go to pot, or at least not normally.
Are you excited about it, Albi, or are we going back to the bad old days of the 1970s?
No, I don't think we are going back to the bad old days of the 1970s, but if we were, I'd like us to get back to 70s levels of childhood obesity, 70s levels of home ownership and 70s levels of family breakdown. But as I said, we're not going to be going back to the 1970s. I think there's a lot of things that we can look forward to, as Jenny has said, and also as Jonathan has said. But we are through this difficult point at the moment of trying to deal with this industrial action. And we desperately need to find a way forwards on it.
All right, well, that's what we're going to discuss in some detail. But before we do, let's talk to Nick Garnett. He's at Manchester Piccadilly Station and get a sense of how exactly it's impacted so far. Today's the first strike day across parts of the country, most of the country, with a reduced or no service whatsoever. Nick, what's going on where you are?
Right, so there are 14 platforms here at Manchester Piccadilly. It's one of the busiest stations in the country outside of London. There are only 3 of those platforms in operation really today. There's a train to York that's going to leave in a few minutes' time. There's a local service down to Cheshire a little later as well. And there has been an hourly service down to London. To Euston. The problem with that is, though, that's been cancelled on the next train, so the next train is going to be another hour after that. It's an awful lot less than normal, just 20% of the trains are running. And you look at the departure board, and the departure board seems quite full. There's lots and lots of yellow stations there. It looks like they're running lots of services, but really that's only every station that those 3 or 4 trains that are running per hour is actually going to call us. There's not an awful lot of action here at all. At one point this morning, there were more pigeons in the station than there were people. There are, I think now, probably more staff here at the station than there are passengers. And that's an interesting thing as well, because Northern Rail has been putting out a message. Northern Rail runs the services out of this station. Northern Rail has been saying to passengers, do not travel by train this week. Now, if you think about it, that's a really strong message from a rail company that wants customers to put out a message to say, we don't want you to come this week. And that, you know, politically, that's a very difficult move for them because they do need more passengers. But I was talking to one member of staff who told me that really what it is they don't want people coming here and not being able to get on a train to go wherever. They wanted people to make alternative arrangements. And it's worked. You're not seeing people angry. You're not seeing people turning up and not being able to get anywhere at all. Let's look around at the rest of the country. London Underground has got a industrial action today. Leeds is having an even worse time because they've got a bus strike which has gone on for 3 weeks as well. ScotRail, there are no services really out of the north out of Glasgow and Edinburgh, and very, very few rural services as well. 90% of their services have been hit. And because of the signalling strike as well, the signalling staff being out, they're also affecting services in Wales. So all round, it's not going very well for the train companies. They knew it was going to be like this. Only 20% of their services seem to be running.
Nick Garnett, thank you very much there at Manchester Piccadilly Station, but giving us a sense of the impact of the rail strikes across the UK. Let's take a look at some of the front pages and how they are reporting the strikes. The Daily Mail. Strikes are a £1 billion lockdown for Britain as unions plunge nation into paralysis with Labour MPs on rail picket lines. If we also have a look at the Telegraph, unions harming those they are meant to help. That's quoting the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The Mirror has a slightly different approach. Planes, trains, automobiles, crisis in all 3. Flights cancelled, railways grind to a halt, petrol prices rise again, and still Transport Secretary Shapps refuses to do anything. And finally, The Guardian. Prime Minister inflames rail dispute with strike breaker threat. We'll talk about some of those themes in just a moment. But first of all, let's introduce Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of the RMT Union. He is now here with us in our Westminster studio. Mick, people can't get to work or to hospital appointments. Students can't get to do their exams today. Everyone is facing a cost of living crisis. How can you justify these strikes to the public?
Well, it's regrettable that this disruption has come around, and we've been looking to try and address these issues with the companies for more than 18 months now. And we wrote to them in December seeking undertakings in regard to the mass redundancies that they're planning, and they've issued us with a formal notice last night that they're going to make mass redundancies in Network Rail. We want to talk to them about their modernisation agenda, the new technology and the flexibility they're seeking. And of course, we want to talk to them about pay, because many of our members in this dispute have not had a pay increase for 2 or 3 years. So there are some serious issues. We don't want to be in dispute. We live in these communities alongside our neighbours, the people that are being disrupted today. Many of those people are also suffering from pay suppression, which has affected the public sector and the private sector. And what we've got is a situation where profits are abounding. Companies making plenty of money in this economy. The train operating companies made profits last year on the lowest level of revenue that there's ever been. The rolling stock leasing companies made profit.
All right.
And so did the subcontractors.
All right,
£500 million of profit was taken out of the railway
OK, well, then
last
why
year.
have you... But that does beg the question of why you have rejected the offer or a potential solution that has been proposed by the CEO of Network Rail. He's been interviewed across the board, Andrew Haines, who just says, we're such an archaic industry in many of our working practices, we can offer a good pay rise to our colleagues and good value to the taxpayer if we can get reforms in. Why have you rejected that?
Well, he made an offer on Friday, it's the only offer we've received, of 2%, which is way below the rate of inflation and doesn't take account for last year's missed
No, but actually,
pay deal.
just to correct that, taking what he said, taking what he said at face value, what he is saying is if you accepted reforms and modernisation, they would be able to go over and above the 3% pay rise that has been offered.
Yeah, they have not put that to us, Jo. What they've put to us...
But would you accept it? Would you accept it if it was put to you?
Let me answer the question. I'll tell you, I'll try and develop the point. They've put to us 2% and a further 1% to accept all of the reforms, all of the change in working practices and all of the redundancies that they wish to propose. What we have said to them in return is if you give us a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies, we can address your flexibility ideas. We've put ideas on the table, as have they, which is all good and well. That's what should happen in this kind of exchange. And then we can develop up what the pay package will be. But what they've got to remember is that the pay package that they've proposed is way short of the cost of living in this country. And it's a paltry amount. The only offer they've made is 2%. The rest of it is delivered through redundancies and changes to working conditions, not just practices, but changes to the way we work, the way people are engaged and the way that people carry out their duties, which will bring severe disruption and a change to the work-life balance.
All right, but
the
in
train
terms of how
operating
long...
companies have done the same.
Yeah, all right, but we'll come back to some of this in a minute. How long is this going to go on for? How long are you prepared to go on striking?
Well, we're running a campaign to get a square deal for our people, and that's part of a wider campaign in society at the minute because working people are being ripped off. When we get a settlement to this dispute, we will stop the industrial action. For as long as we haven't got a settlement, there will be a campaign of continuous industrial action on an irregular basis in order for us to pursue the agenda that we've got. Now, we think an agreement is available. I share that idea with Andrew Haines and other senior people in the industry. The problem is that Grant Shapps and Rishi Sunak are dictating the terms in this dispute. And in fact, for the train operators, it's directly written in to their passenger service contracts.
All right, well, let's pick up...
the Secretary of State is responsible for industrial relations.
All right, Mick, listen, we've got to bring in the other panellists in. I'm going to keep you here so that you can listen to what they say. But first of all, let me just show this headline, The Independent. Teaching and NHS unions warn of strike action unless government improves pay offer. How can we stop this summer of discontent and striking, Jonathan?
Well, I used to be a trade union representative. And the key part of being a trade union representative is the ability to negotiate and give and take on both sides. What Mick sadly is, he wants his cake and he wants to eat it. He won't come down and have a sensible conversation about the fact that 3% is a very good offer on the table with modernisation. But you've heard, even now Network Rail are moving to a position where they're saying we will go above 3% with modernisation. And Mick's talking about, you know, modernisation is a scary thing. Modernisation such as installing an app on your phone so you can communicate better with your workers or having sensors on trains to detect deficiencies in the rail network, I don't think are controversial things. I think they're good things because they means that drivers are safer and ultimately, people on the rail line as well are safer. And that's what we want to see, the best health and safety we can. And what Mick's doing is undermining the rail network. We know passenger numbers are down by about 20% to pre-pandemic levels. We are in a world where we want to get to a place where we have net zero. That means encouraging more people onto public transport. These strikes are only going to drive people further away from it. And the pay rise that Mick wants will therefore just add more cost to the rail network, making it more unaffordable for more working people. He should be apologising to the doctors and nurses who can't get to hospital, the patients who can't get their operation, the kids who will miss out on their education today, but also those armed forces veterans who risk their lives for our freedoms, who won't be able to celebrate Armed Forces Day on Saturday.
Do you want to apologise for all that, Mick?
Well, I think Jonathan should apologise for talking nonsense. None of that is true. We have got automated technology on trains. We've got pantograph cameras. We've got ultrasonic sensors. We've got things that detect faults on tracks. That is all rubbish. I negotiated that deal with Network Rail myself. We've got on-train technicians, all sorts of new technology that is being deployed. So That is just stuff that's written in Conservative Central Office for backbench MPs to spout
no
along
sorry
with their
to veterans,
ministers.
Mick. OK, so no
now,
sorry to
I
veterans.
don't want this disruption. Fine. I don't want people to be
good to know veterans
inconvenienced, and I want a settlement to this dispute. I can't do that with a backbench MP who's just learnt it off a script.
Well, hang on. Let him respond.
We know what the issues are.
Let me respond. Have you just learnt it off a script? Is this stuff that's coming out of Conservative Central Office? The accusations are that you're relishing this.
I'm not relishing watching my constituents not get to Staffordshire University, which is a university where lots of students travel in on the train network from places like Stafford, Wolverhampton, therefore missing out on education or missing out on exams. I'm not relishing the fact that people can't get to Stafford's Hospital from Stoke-on-Trent today for surgeries or operations that they needed, because a third of the people in Stoke-on-Trent don't have a car. So actually they rely on public transport networks. So this idea that I'm just reading off a script, what Mick needs to do is get out of London, get into the real world, go and talk to people in places like Stoke-on-Trent and hear why they're so angry, not only in undermining what's trying to happen with the modernisation, but also as I try and get bids for the Stoke to Leek line to come back, which is reopening a line for his workers to be able to use, he's undermining that very cause.
Jenny, how do you stop this? How do you find a resolution and stop a summer of discontent?
The only thing that the government should be doing is trying to solve this. And from what we've seen ministers say and the tone that's being taken, it looks very much that they are revelling in this. Last week they described as wedge week, a week when they get to sow as much division as they possibly can.
These are issues that
This government is dysfunctional. They should be doing absolutely everything they can to resolve this dispute, because some of the things that Jonathan said are right about the impact this is having on communities. But the way the government has stepped back, has said this is nothing to do with us, when it's something that's bringing communities up and down the country, unable to get to work, unable to get health treatment, unable to get to school, that's not acceptable. The government should be an active player in this, should be thinking, what can I do to make this better and not make this worse?
What about the issue and the proposal being put on the table by Andrew Haynes, the CEO of Network Rail? The proposal that there would be bigger pay rises if modernisation is grasped by the unions in a meaningful way.
It seems to me that there's a really strong case, as Jonathan sets out, for the modernisation of our railways and the working conditions. And in order to get unions to accept those, I think we do need to be more generous on pay. But you also, as Jenny says, need to work really hard at developing a constructive, collaborative relationship. And as I'm sure Jonathan did when he was a trade union representative, it's actually really difficult, because you have got two sides in a dispute. You've got two sides. You've got the people with the money and the people who want decent pay. And it's difficult and it's emotional. And the problem is that the government, I think, is just thinking about the macro politics, wanting to sort of do a bit of Osborne talking up of austerity. People are going to have to show some restraint because we don't want inflation to carry on. Well, you know, it reminds me of when Theresa May said in the 2017 general election to a nurse, so there's no magic money tree, was kind of rude and dismissive and patronising. That's exactly the way to get people's backs up, make them less likely to accept modernisation. We need a better settlement on pay across the public sector. And if we need to take other fiscal or monetary policy changes in order to reduce the impacts of that on inflation, we have to do that. You cannot expect inflation to be stopped simply by the lower income people in this country.
Is the government also throwing flames, if you like, on this whole dispute, Albie, by proposing to the union strike breaking by bringing in agency workers? Is that going to help?
I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. The government should be legislating to minimise the impact of these strikes on the British people. I think they should also be bringing in minimum service requirements. One asks the question why a government with an 80-seat majority, where it might be smaller later on this week, isn't bringing in this legislation right now or didn't already bring it in.
Right, it was suggested in 2015. Why didn't you bring it in then?
Well, I was elected on the 2019 manifesto, Jo, and ultimately that manifesto does make those commitments to a minimum service requirement. And it does also talk about the fact that Albie's right. We're not just talking about agency workers in their traditional sense. Grant Shapps has been very clear. We're talking about people existing in Network Rail with transferable skills who can go into the system. But
why has it taken so long for it to be brought in?
Well, Jo, the reality is we've had a pandemic which has lasted over 18 months, nearly 2 years now, which is legislation that's taken up a lot of time. MPs were told, like the rest of the country, to stay at home, which meant a lot of legislation that I wanted to get on with, that I was looking forward to delivering. I got elected to level up places like Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk, got delayed. I'm deeply frustrated by it. And, you know, I'm pleased to hear Jenny sort of take a robust tone about these strikes. I'm just waiting for those words, I will condemn the strikes. I know Louise Haigh
we'll come on
couldn't
to that
get onto
that
in the chamber yesterday, but I'm sure Jenny can correct the record today.
We have to stop thinking about the Conservative government as something that started in 2019. You know, the Conservatives have been the dominant party or the only party in government since 2010. This was actually put forward, the minimum service requirements, by Ed Davey when he was the employment minister in 2010, 2011. They just never get anything done.
Right, well, in getting nothing done, would it work, Mick? Would it smash and stop the strikes, bringing agency workers in?
Well, agency late workers can't do the work. I've heard this dozens of times. There aren't agency workers available. We've got a shortage of labour. And if you think that an agency worker can come in and operate a signal control centre by just rocking up and doing that, what's happening today is that managers who've been trained over a couple of hours are running this small timetable, and that's why there are so many delays and cancellations today. They're simply not capable of doing it.
All right.
There's safety critical work all over the railway. There are people out there that are on strike today all over the country that have got high skills and high responsibilities. This agency worker stuff is a load of nonsense, frankly, and it won't resolve
well, let Jonathan
this
reply.
dispute.
Well, Mick seems to say everything is a load of nonsense, you know, whether that be Network Rail saying it, the government saying it, unless we basically take him, Chapter and Gospel. Mick doesn't want to listen to what anyone's got to say. He's still not apologised to veterans for they're going to miss out on Armed Forces Day. He's not apologised to doctors and nurses, patients and children who will miss out on their exams. I'm waiting for that apology. And I just think that Mick needs to take a more grown-up approach to this negotiation. Instead of spouting off in the media, doing his normal Tory attack lines that I know he's obsessed with, he actually gets around the table and comes to a settlement, because Network Rail are clearly ready to be negotiated with, and it's now up to Mick to be the grown-up and do that as well.
Mick?
Well, I've apologised to the public. I think I did it at the start of this show. I am sorry for the disruption that's caused, but that disruption is a creation of the government, because they've been itching to get into this for nearly 2 years. As are many employers, they are using COVID as a smokescreen to bring in detrimental, permanent changes to people's conditions of service. And the train operating companies have said to me this week, we are going to lower the salaries of workers in the rail industry, and we're going to extend their working hours. That's aside from the fact that salaries have not kept up with inflation. They're going to absolutely lower them. Now, there are all sorts of changes that people don't understand, that are subject to negotiation, and we will work with the companies as long as we get some guarantees about job security and the pay package for our people going forward.
Jonathan?
I just find this whole idea of modernisation bizarre, to be quite honest, Joe, because Mick seems to be pretending that, for example, people are no longer using ticket offices. He thinks that he lives in those days when they used to. They're using apps on their phone to buy tickets. People want the sensors on the trains. And Mick's very proud to say he negotiated. That's good. Mick does understand modernisation is important. And also the fact that we have actually train drivers on the £59,000 a year medium salary, well above the national average and well above places like Stoke-on-Trent, where they earn under £100 per year. So actually what Mick is saying is, let's just have more. And, you know, those doctors, those nurses, those teachers, they can have less.
Right, Mick, you're saying it's nonsense. I'm going to let you respond to it. Can I just pick up on the median salary? Because this is something that's been quoted.
The people in this dispute is £31,000. I've been on a picket line this morning at Euston, St Pancras and King's Cross, where the salary of the people that I'm representing is about £24,000 to £28,000. There are lots of high-paid people in the railway. They tend to be the people I'm sitting across the table from. Andrew Haynes is on £600,000.
But hang on, Mick, do you dispute that there are railway drivers that are on £59,000?
The train drivers are at the upper end of the scale. But the people in this dispute, the people in this dispute are the lower paid echelon of railway workers. We are not opposed to modernisation. We are not opposed to new technology, and we negotiate it with companies all of the time. But Jonathan's putting forward this idea that there is no technology deployed on trains in this country. That is completely and utterly untrue.
All right, let's move on and let's find out what the Labour Party's position is proposed these strikes. Let me just show you this tweet from Sharon Graham from the Unite Union. The Labour Party was founded by the trades unions, and we expect Labour MPs to defend workers by words and by actions. To instruct Labour MPs not to be on picket lines with workers speaks volumes. She goes on to say, you don't lead by hiding. No one respects that. It's time to decide whose side you are on, workers or bad bosses. Whose side are you on, Jenny?
Look, what we're not going to do is start pitching in to make political points that might suit us or bits of the Labour Party. We don't want to do anything that is going to make this worse. Unlike the government, the Labour Party is in the business of trying to make things better.
Well, no, you're standing back in exactly the same way you accused the government of.
We are not. We are calling on the government to roll its sleeves up and get involved and do its job. And unfortunately, if by saying a particular thing or doing a particular thing, the Labour Party could help resolve this, we would do it.
All right, well, what do you think? What do you think about your colleague Kate Osborne? Here she is tweeting, on the picket line at Bromley, I'm a trade unionist. I will always stand on the side of the workers. Solidarity. Should she be there or not?
That's up to Kate. That's her decision. But the position of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party and the Shadow Cabinet is we want to see these strikes resolved. The only
What's the position of Keir Starmer when it comes to being on the picket line?
The only way, Keir Starmer will not be on a picket line. Yeah, I'll tell you why.
Yeah, but she's undermining his leadership, isn't she, by standing there on the picket line when it's been reported, certainly from the front bench, they've been told not to join the picket line.
The only way this gets resolved isn't by the Labour Party taking any particular position or saying any particular phrase that Jonathan or anyone else might like us to say. The only way this gets sorted out is by the government getting round the table, using its power and its influence to reach resolution.
All right, well, just clarify.
That's what people care about.
Just clarify one point, because it is important, and we've just heard from Sharon Graham there, and Kate Osborne, a front bencher, is on the picket line. Should Labour MPs be on the picket line or not?
It's up to an individual Labour MP what they do. I'm not going to tell Kate what she should or shouldn't be doing.
Did Keir Starmer say to you and other front benchers not to join the picket line?
Keir Starmer made it clear that for the Shadow Cabinet, and it was not helpful for us to be on the picket line, and he's absolutely right. We shouldn't be putting ourselves in positions that make this worse. We are getting up every day trying to make lives better for our constituents.
All right, well,
we want to be in government.
Well, let's see if Mick Lynch agrees with you. What do you say to what you just heard from Jenny Chapman in terms of what the Labour Party's position is towards these strikes?
Well, the Labour Party was founded by the trade unions. In fact, it was founded by my trade union, the original resolution. So that's ironic, because we're not affiliated. And one of the reasons we're not affiliated is because Labour politicians since Blair have not identified with working class people. And failing to do that is one of the problems they've got in working class communities, and they've left the door open to populists and others to come into the situation. The Labour Party is about supporting working people, or it should be, not triangulating from opinion makers such as the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and the Times. So they've got to sort out their identity, and they've got to come up with a set of policies that are going to relieve working class poverty, are going to give us a stable workplace with good conditions and good minimum standards. That's what the Labour Party should be about. I welcome anyone that wants to join us on our picket lines and show us messages of support.
All right, well,
if Keir Starmer can't do that, that's a problem for him, not for us.
Jenny?
But Keir Starmer wants to be Prime Minister. And in order to get that job, he needs to show that he's the sort of person who wants to resolve these kinds of disputes. And actually, Mick, you don't know anything about my background or my community or where I come from. So,
I can't even see you. I don't even know who you are. So there you go.
Well, there you go. So, don't tell me who I am and whether or not I'm working class or whatever, any of those sorts of things.
I didn't tell you you weren't working class. I don't even know your name.
Well, shouldn't you, Mick? She's, Jenny Chapman, she's on Labour's front bench.
Yeah, but I can't see her because I'm sitting in a remote studio.
No,
I don't know who I'm talking
right.
to or how many of you there are.
That's not really the point. The point that I really want to get across is that what the Labour Party thinks should happen is the government needs to stop causing and making these issues worse, and it needs to start resolving them, and it needs to start getting people in a room and negotiating. Because as you know, Mick, and I think as Jonathan knows in his heart of hearts as well, that's where this is going to end up, and we are going to end up with a negotiated solution. Our point is we need to get there sooner rather than later.
Mick? What do you say to what Jenny Chapman has just outlined in terms of the Labour Party's position? They want to be the party of government.
Well, that's fine, and I want Keir Starmer to succeed, and I hope he becomes the next Prime Minister, because he will be better than this shower that we've got at the moment.
And is that because you won't...
changing government will be welcomed by me.
Is that because you won't negotiate with Tories?
Yes.
Look, I've never said that. This is another untruth that's told. I've met every Tory Transport Minister, every single one of them, including the chap that's now the Chief Whip, who used to be the Rail Minister. We will sit down with anyone that's got a contribution to make and construct a settlement. I have never said I will not talk to Tory ministers or even departmental officials. That is not on our agenda. We will discuss the issues with anyone who can contribute to a settlement.
All right, we're going to move on. Mick Lynch, thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to talk about Brexit because there has been a report done and an article article in response from Ian Duncan-Smith, which we can show you the headline from. He's written in the Daily Telegraph today, only Remainer elites have lost confidence in Great Britain. Whitehall must learn from the public and embrace the opportunities Brexit affords. This follows a report by the Centre for Brexit Policy, who have said that Brexit has not led to positive changes for the UK because ministers and civil servants have a declinist mentality in which they see Britain as a fading force. Do you agree with that report, Jonathan?
I think we're doing a pretty good job with Brexit overall, bearing in mind that we've had, obviously, a global pandemic, which has clearly taken government's attention. Now we're seeing war in Europe for the first time since 1945. So clearly the government has had a lot of things on its plate. But in that time, we've managed to do some fantastic trade deals, as I say, over 70 negotiated to date so far. We've obviously been able to do things such as the beer duty cut, which wouldn't have been possible, and help massive brewers like mine, Titanic.
But do you think it's being held back in the way Ian Duncan-Smith says by Remainer elites?
I know that the Twitterati will expect me to go in here and just bash people, but actually I'm not for bashing people. I think there are people within... No, I don't think Ian's wrong. I do think there are people in the civil service who are opposed to Brexit and unable to separate their personal views from their professional work. I think we've seen that clearly in the Home Office as well when it comes to our fantastic Rwanda policy. So, at the end of the day, there are things that, civil servants are elected to serve the elected government of that day, and I do hope they can put personal feelings to one side and focus on what matters, which is delivering for the British people.
Polly?
When I first saw this headline, I really thought it was like something from The Onion, sort of like we're being trolled. This idea that Brexit's not going very well because Remainer elites. It's this truly astonishing thing. The Conservative Party has talked itself into believing that it's not in government, that it doesn't control the Treasury and Downing Street. And everywhere they have seized, quite rightly, through democracy, control of what our country is doing. And now they're still trying to blame these shadowy... Literally, where are they? Who are they? They control everything. They've put, somebody who's much more friendly to them into the BBC. They still complain about the BBC. It's a weird kind of terror of admitting the reality, which is that Brexit is really, really complicated and it isn't going very well.
Albie?
Brexit is complicated, but I'm optimistic for the future. As for the Conservative Party, I think we need to stop coming up with reasons why we're not doing things. We have a once-in-a-generation chance with an 80-seat majority to really make a huge difference in this country, and I feel that we're squandering it. Last year, Ian Duncan-Smith led a recommendation review, the Task Force for Innovation, Growth and Regulatory Reform, where he came up with over 100 excellent regulatory reforms that we could pass through now that we've left the European Union. That was developed in coalition with people from all sides of the Brexit debate. I'm not sure if anything has happened on that. I think it was published a year ago this week.
So is woke dogma holding it back?
No, that's complete nonsense. What is holding it back is this government's inability to pass legislation with an 80-seat majority. We've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to deliver the reforms that this country needs, and I feel that we're squandering it.
Jenny?
I think that's correct, actually. I think the trouble is that we still talk as if Brexit's something to be contested and questioned. Actually, it's happened. We're out of the EU now. And, whether people supported it or didn't, you have to engage with the situation that you're in. There's a lot to be optimistic about. There are some things that we can do now that we couldn't have done before. The Labour Party has a very strong make, buy, sell British position, where we want to use the state's buying power and procurement freedoms to support British industries and British manufacturers, particularly in the north of England. And we need to get on with things like that. What strikes me about the government's approach to this and the government's approach to the strikes and certain other things as well is it does seem to just decide each day what is it that we can cause a fight about? How can we keep the drama going?
Well, let's stick with Labour, because actually, if we look at this in The Observer, Labour must break party silence on Brexit, says your colleague Stella Creasy. She doesn't feel you've said nearly enough. Labour MP calls on the leadership to name problems as frustration grows with its stance on Europe. What do you say to her?
Well, I don't agree with Stella on this. I think that there are certainly problems that need to be fixed, and the Northern Ireland Protocol is one of them, and we believe that that is completely resolvable. We've suggested an agreement on food and drink, which would remove the majority of the checks.
But that's closer alignment. Do you agree with her and Anna McMorran, one of your other front bench colleagues, that we should be rejoining the single market?
No, and Anna has That was not what she should have said, and she does that. That is not the position. There are some people...
But is that how they feel? Is that how a lot of Labour MPs still feel?
I don't think it is. I think people are looking forward. I think that, the idea that you can now rejoin the single market and the customs union and solve your problems isn't what business wants. It's not what they're saying. We do need to get a more mature, stable relationship with the EU. But the deal that we have is the deal that we have. And it's pliable enough just that it can be supplemented with additional agreements. The Northern Ireland Protocol issues can be resolved, but not with the approach the government's taking, which is all about drama, argument, keeping the row going because it suits them politically, but it's just not in the best interest of this country.
Jonathan?
Jo, Labour have shown they're divided on rail strikes. Some are on picket lines, some aren't. They're ignoring Keir Starmer's instructions. Then they're divided on Brexit. They want to rejoin the single market. That is the mask that slipped at the end of the day. And the idea that
Jenny did actually quite clearly say that's not Labour's position.
Remainer, who wanted the people's vote in a second referendum and said he would openly campaign to remain in the EU, tells me everything I need to know about this woke Labour Party, to be quite frank, that is terrifying to the people of Stoke-on-Trent, North Kissing-Talk, who 73% voted to leave the European Union, but was sneered and snarled at by a Labour Party obsessed with the London bubble.
Jenny?
Because
let Jenny respond.
Jonathan, you can say an awful lot of things if you want, and it's your right, you've come here to make your case. But what you cannot say is that Labour Party position is something that it factually isn't. And actually, you have backbench Tory MPs saying things that you'd probably prefer they didn't. Tobias Selwood on this issue. So, I don't think that you can sit there with any credibility at all. I might just leave it there. Or, on this issue,
the Labour Party literally wanted a second referendum to campaign for Remain. Those are his words during the whole Brexit
But Boris Johnson used to be in favour of an amnesty for asylum seekers. So people in politics are allowed to change their mind.
You shift
when
the
facts change, as reality changes, the political situation changes, you change your mind. And that's actually OK. Keir Starmer has set out his position. Personally, I think it's a bit silly because it would be great if we rejoined the single market. And what's happened since 2016 is that the Brexiteers, many of whom said we should stay in the single market and the customs union, got progressively more and more extreme. And now saying we should rejoin the single market, which we should at least be able to debate, is, what you mean is we should rejoin the European Union. They're not actually the same thing.
Happy to discuss it. I'm not saying that that's, it's wrong to be discussed.
What I'm saying is, it's so toxic. You can't even say it without people saying you're
Do you really think it is politically viable to argue that we should rejoin the single market, 2 years after we've left? This is not the point. It's about whether or not it is politically viable.
Where is growth going to come from?
Growth could come from the reforms that were in the Task Force for Innovation, Growth and Regulatory Reform. There are so many reforms, over 100, I think, in that report, including reforms to GDPR, reforms to clinical trials, reforms to what pension funds can invest in that could deliver growth. The government has 2 years now, before the next general election, to get on with it and implement some of those reforms so that the electorate votes for us at the next general election.
Can I just clear up one point, and that's on reports about Keir Starmer making a speech on immigration that was going to happen and now isn't going to happen. What is the state of that?
I don't know about speeches that are planned, but obviously, the Labour Party will need a fully worked out position on immigration, which will be, post-Brexit, post-freedom of movement. It'll be a programme around a points-based system that people can see and take a view on.
And is freedom of movement ruled out?
Yes.
Completely?
Yes.
Of course, Keir Starmer did stand on a different platform when he ran for the leadership.
We were in the EU then. This is a different world. We are looking forwards, as I keep having to say. We don't want to be having these arguments that have gone now. We need to engage with the new reality and the future of the country as it is today.
Well, thank you for clearing that up, because when it comes to immigration and controlling borders, Jonathan, you will probably know that in terms of the most recent figures, net migration from non-EU countries has remained at 251,000 in the last year, or the latest year, I should say. Is that what you voted for?
What I voted for was a fantastic new Nationality and Borders Bill, Act now of Parliament, which sadly Labour voted against, which is reforming the broken asylum system.
Are those the figures your constituents wanted to see?
My constituents have no issue with people coming to this country legally. They want people to come through safe and legal routes. And we are, by the way, in Stoke-on-Trent, the 5th largest contributor to the asylum dispersal scheme. So we're a very friendly, welcoming city. In fact, voted so only last year. So we have no issue with people coming to work in the NHS and help our public services and bring innovation and their worldly knowledge to help our country. What we don't think is acceptable is people coming from safe mainland France as illegal economic migrants.
It's a slightly different issue, but let me just show you this in the Times. Grammars, as in grammar schools, could level up country, MPs tell Johnson. You were one of those. That's a headline in yesterday's Times. Why do you want to see a return of grammar schools?
Well, as a former teacher, what I want us to make sure is that we have the very best education spread across the country, and I want that equal opportunity to level up. And I don't think it's fair that kids in Stratford-upon-Avon, or we know 60% of grammars are based in 11 of the local education authorities in London and South East, are based there, when actually they're not spread at all in the North East, which Jenny will only too well know. And if it's good enough for Sir Keir Starmer, it should be good enough for the kids of Stoke-on-Trent.
Do you think it'll actually happen? It's been promised before in previous manifestos. It hasn't happened.
We've been having, I've been talking to lots of colleagues, and it's good that there's lots of positive engagement. And obviously we will look at the schools bill as it comes forward, and hopefully put forward, our views on how that can be amended to make sure.
It's something that you're in favour of and you want to see as part of levelling up. What evidence do you have that it actually boosts social mobility?
Well, Northern Ireland, for example, it improved educational attainment by about 10% when grammar schools were introduced there. And when it comes to the gap between free school meal students or kids on pupil premium and non-pupil premium, what you saw is actually narrow the gap from the current state school, which is about 23%.
OK, well, we're talking specifically about schools in England for this purpose, although I take your point about Northern Ireland. Is there evidence that it actually boosts social mobility?
For the very small, lucky few who get into the grammar school, absolutely. But crucially, richer kids are much, much more likely to get into those schools. And it's absolutely correct that those remaining parts of the country that have grammars tend to be in those richer areas, but they're not helping the poorer kids in those areas. And the idea that they would help poorer kids in Stoke-on-Trent is just absolutely nonsense, because actually what you do is you asset strip the brighter, the middle-class kids from the comprehensive, and you make it much harder for the 70, 80% who are left behind in those schools. If you had an answer to what a brilliant secondary modern actually looked like, the grammar school story might have some integrity. But no one has ever solved that problem. If you extract the best and the brightest from a community, you create an educational problem that causes immense
Jo, if I may very quickly, unfortunately, Polly has fallen into the trap of the poverty of aspiration. And I worked as a teacher. There was never a student who came into my classroom that I didn't believe could achieve a grade 9. What they needed was that support within the school and obviously support at home as well.
But it's whether grammar schools are that vehicle.
And grammar schools can indeed be part of the vehicle to that solution. I'm not saying that they are the silver bullet, but when you've got fantastic academies like Michaela in the system, but we haven't got enough of them, or enough Catherine Birbalsings across the country.
Michaela's not a grammar school.
I know Michaela's not grammar, but Catherine Birbalsing, there's not enough of her in the education system.
But I'm not sure Catherine Birbalsing would actually agree with you that we need more grammar schools. And I actually agree with Catherine on this, who is, of course, the government's social mobility SARS. She's done an amazing job with the Michaela School. There are other schools in London, the Brampton Academy, which outperformed Eton, I think, on Oxbridge places last year. And with the whole question of grammar schools, it seems to me like yesterday's solution for tomorrow's problem. And actually what we need to be focusing on are the solutions today, which we know work, like Michaela, like Brampton Manor, and replicating them across the entire school system in Britain.
Do they boost social mobility?
No, they don't. There's no evidence for that at all. We think it's wrong to segregate children at the age of 11. And the idea that, let's be clear why the government's reaching for this. It's because it's in trouble and it wants to ingratiate the leadership of the Tory party, think this will go down well with their backbenchers. I don't think there's any sort of mystery about any of this.
Jenny,
but no,
1 in 5 Labour MPs went to grammar school. If it was good enough for them, why is it not good enough for other kids?
Look, there are about 150 of these schools left.
163,
there you go. So, these are not spread up and down the country. If you're an 11-year-old child now, as opposed to back in the day when those Labour MPs you're talking about, who are probably in their 50s and 60s now, went to grammar school, now parents are hiring tutors, paying them £50 an hour to coach their children in year 6 through these tests to get them into grammar school. So actually, it's never been less about social mobility than it is now.
You've got a few seconds, Jonathan.
No one's saying that the current system is perfect. I want multiple entry points. I want to see STEM specialists and digital specialists as well as academic specialists. So grammar schools can be good, but yes, they do need reform as well.
All right, that's all we have time for. From all of us here, have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.